He was denied entry to the club, while the white teen in ripped jeans walked right past. No explanation. No apology. Just a smirk from the bouncer, and not your vibe. But 3 hours later, that same black man walked back, with a deed in his hand and revenge in his eyes. What happened next shattered every rule they thought they could hide behind. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the mix of luxury car exhaust and perfume that clung to the nightlife of downtown Atlanta. On the glistening sidewalk outside Velvet, the city's trendiest club, the line wrapped around the block, humming with weekend energy. Beneath golden neon signage and velvet ropes, people smiled, laughed, and snapped selfies in anticipation of getting past the gatekeepers of cool. Marcus Ellington stood near the front of the line, hands tucked neatly into his pockets, his demeanor calm, deliberate. At 32, Marcus exuded a quiet kind of success, bespoke blazer in charcoal gray, open-collar linen shirt, Italian loafers that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. His beard was perfectly trimmed, his cologne subtle but firm. He didn't wear labels, he didn't need to. Beside him, Jason Hunter, tall, lanky, blonde, and white, bounced on his heels with the loose confidence of a man who never questioned if a door would open for him. "You sure you want to do this?" Jason asked, tilting his head toward the velvet rope. Marcus gave a tight smile. "It's just a club. One drink. Then I'm out." The bouncer stood like a sentry, massive, stone-faced, and scanning each guest with eyes that flicked between suspicion and approval. He checked IDs and waved groups through, nodding at women in strappy heels and white men in t-shirts that didn't meet any reasonable dress code. When Marcus stepped forward, the bouncer's gaze dropped, first to his loafers, then slowly upward, lingering too long, like he was trying to decode a threat. "Nah," the bouncer grunted. "Not tonight." Marcus blinked. "Excuse me, dress code," the bouncer said flatly, one hand on the velvet rope, the other gripping a radio on his hip. Jason chuckled, not realizing yet. "We're together." The bouncer glanced at Jason, smiled faintly, and said, "Go ahead." Jason paused, puzzled, turning back. "He's with me." "I said go ahead," the bouncer repeated, then fixed his eyes on Marcus. "He's not coming in." Marcus's voice didn't rise, but the restraint in it was sharp. "I'm wearing a blazer. Leather loafers. Nothing here violates your dress code." The bouncer didn't budge. "I said what I said." By now, people in line were watching. A couple of phones tilted in Marcus's direction, recording casually under the guise of checking messages. Jason stepped back toward Marcus. "This is insane, man. Let's bounce." But Marcus didn't move. He wasn't here just for a drink anymore. Not after that look. Not after the silent confirmation that he wasn't turned away for shoes, but for skin. "I'd like to speak to the manager," Marcus said, his tone composed but firm. The bouncer smirked. "Manager's inside." "You're not." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Then call them out." Instead, the bouncer reached for his radio. "Security front door. Need assist." Within seconds, a second man appeared, bulkier, darker skinned, but wearing the same security earpiece. His tone was lower, but no less cold. "You're being asked to leave," the second guard said. "Don't make it a problem." "I didn't make this a problem," Marcus replied. "I asked for a manager. You made it something else." The crowd wasn't laughing now. It was the kind of silence that prickled too polite, too restrained. Two girls behind him whispered something about always playing the race card. A group of guys in hoodies breezed past the rope without a glance from security. Then came the final blow. The second guard stepped forward, towering over Marcus. "You need to leave, or we'll call APD." "That did it." Marcus's chest swelled, but he didn't raise his voice. He stepped back, not in defeat, but in decision. He looked over at Jason, who stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, as if caught between protest and privilege. "I'm good," Marcus said quietly. "This ain't my night." Jason started to follow, guilt painted across his face, but Marcus waved him off. "Go in. I know you've been wanting this for weeks." "You sure?" Jason asked, visibly uncomfortable. Marcus nodded once, and Jason disappeared reluctantly through the doors. The velvet rope dropped behind him like a gavel. Marcus walked 3 blocks without direction. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the white-hot anger, boiling beneath layers of collected restraint. He thought of his mother, who told him, "No matter how clean you walk, they'll still see mud." He thought of the years spent building a life that could never be mistaken for less than. The education, the sacrifice, the silence swallowed every time someone assumed he didn't belong in the rooms he owned. He stopped in a dim parking lot lit only by a flickering street lamp. He took out his phone and stared at the blank screen for a moment. This wasn't about Velvet. Not really. This was about every Velvet. Every boardroom where he was mistaken for an intern. Every conference where he was articulate for a guy like you. Every investor who said his startup lacked cultural fit. Every smile he swallowed to keep the peace. No more. He tapped a contact and brought the phone to his ear. The voice on the other end answered immediately. Yo, Marcus? You good? I need a favor, Marcus said, voice steady now. Name it. I need everything you can pull on a club called Velvet. Ownership structure, zoning permits, shell companies, tax history, everything. A beat of silence. Damn. Okay. You want a background check or a fire drill? Marcus's eyes narrowed. Burn it down legally. I'm done knocking. He ended the call and stared out at the street. A breeze picked up, rattling leaves across the pavement. Somewhere behind him, laughter spilled out from inside Velvet's golden doors. He didn't turn around. He wouldn't need to. The phone buzzed again. A new message lit up the screen. It was from an old college friend, now a real estate lawyer. Text funny timing. Heard Velvet might be up for sale. Quietly. Marcus's lips curled into the faintest, most dangerous smile he'd worn in years. Then let's make them beg me to walk in. The glow of Marcus's laptop screen lit up the dark corner of his downtown apartment like a crime lab. Outside, the city pulsed on without him. Music, sirens, laughter, but inside, the mood had shifted. The club incident hadn't just bruised his pride. It had opened a wound that was decades deep, and now Marcus was dissecting it with surgical precision. His phone buzzed twice, then a file began downloading from his company's internal server. Velvet Master Report Debts EAP. The timestamp read 11:03 p.m. Less than 30 minutes after his call. Marcus didn't flinch. He just exhaled slowly and double-clicked. The first folder revealed internal structure charts. Beneath the glossy brand name Velvet, the legal ownership traced back to an entity called Golden Quarters Holdings, a Delaware-based LLC. Digging deeper, Marcus found 3 more shells between the club and its real financiers. At the top sat Blackstone Hospitality Ventures, a private investment firm, known for lifestyle properties, but only in select high gentrification neighborhoods. Marcus's eyes narrowed. The board of Blackstone? All white. Mostly old money. Country club stock photos on LinkedIn. Half of them had never stepped foot in Atlanta. A second folder contained scraped Yelp and Google reviews. Marcus's AI algorithm had flagged specific keywords: denied, dress code, turned away, and discriminated. Dozens of entries, all eerily similar. Told I didn't meet the dress code. I was in a suit. Saw them let in 5 white guys wearing hoodies right after they said no hats to me. Same story, different night. If you're black, don't bother. None of these had ever gone viral. No influencers. No journalists. Just frustration buried in internet noise. Then came the legal folder. A 2022 PDF titled Ellis Fiercy Velvet Atlanta LLC. Marcus opened it, and his breath caught. The plaintiff was a 21-year-old black college student, Kayla Ellis. Denied entry at a Velvet location, despite being on a VIP guest list. She had been publicly mocked by the bouncer. Same MO, different night. The incident ended in tears and went to court. The final document showed a sealed settlement for an undisclosed sum, no admission of wrongdoing. The file was buried 6 layers deep in Georgia's district archives. They paid her off, Marcus whispered, and made it disappear. The next few files were visual. Photos of the club's interiors, taken by employees who must have been curious, or maybe conflicted. One showed a white-only group doing shots in backwards baseball caps, while another black guest was being escorted out for wearing urban attire. Another image showed a security memo posted in the staff lounge. It read, "Dress code strictly enforced. No hoodies, chains, Timberlands, baggy jeans. Use discretion." Marcus stared at the phrase, "use discretion." In other words, use your bias. His cursor hovered over another document, an internal Slack export from a former employee who'd granted Marcus's team access anonymously. Within the chat thread, staff joked about the Thursday filter code for lighter skin and looser standards. One bartender had written, "Nick knows who to keep out. That's why he's head door." The name froze Marcus. Nick. The same bouncer who denied him entry. Another file confirmed it. A scanned training doc showed Nick's name next to the title, Front Door Lead. Discretionary screenings. The language was vague but disturbing. Uphold the brand standard. Maintain demographic harmony. Ensure visual cohesion. Visual cohesion, Marcus repeated under his breath, the words turning metallic on his tongue. He leaned back, eyes closed, letting the fury simmer instead of boil. This wasn't about one man turning him away. This was an ecosystem built to reject people like him, silently, repeatedly, legally. They had weaponized ambience, turned racism into an aesthetic choice, and buried the bloodstains under scented candles and guest lists. The data kept pouring in. Staff turnover records showed that non-white employees rarely lasted longer than 6 months. Customer feedback reports revealed that complaints of discrimination were often marked as non-actionable. Even the music playlist skewed deliberately toward palatable pop, with only a light dusting of black culture just enough to seem trendy, never threatening. Marcus pulled out his journal, the same one he used to map ideas for startups and client pitches. Tonight he turned to a blank page and wrote 4 words in the center. This is the blueprint. He wasn't just uncovering a problem. He was seeing a pattern, one that reached far beyond Velvet. This was how they kept spaces clean of disruption, how they curated whiteness without ever saying it aloud. They didn't use slurs. They used software, policies, brand identity, and when someone noticed, they settled, quietly. His phone buzzed again, this time a live chat ping from his senior systems analyst, Lauren. Lauren, 10:47 p.m. Found archived social posts from staff. Some questionable captions. Sending now. He clicked the link. Instagram screenshots filled the screen. Another hood night, here we go. Captioned under a photo of a mostly black line outside the club. VIP, or EBT. Taken from the DJ booth. On a night with mostly black guests. Adiel or Wakanda, followed by laughing emojis. The accounts were now deleted, but the cache was preserved. Marcus shook his head slowly. They're laughing in our faces. He clicked back to his dashboard and typed in a search command. Locate. Ownership transfer feasibility. Subject Velvet Atlanta Inc. The screen responded in seconds. Franchise privately held. Parent company subject to multiple lanes. Q1 earnings down 14%. One subsidiary, Velvet Miami, currently defaulting on lease. Opportunity index green. It was like watching a vault door crack open. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and typed a single message to Alicia Hampton, his former law school classmate turned real estate and franchise acquisition specialist. Marcus. What would it take to buy out a franchise under shell ownership? He stared at the blinking dots as she typed back. Alicia. Depends. Which franchise? Marcus.
Velvet.
There was a pause. Then 3 words appeared. Alicia. Are you serious? Marcus's fingers hovered over the screen before typing. Dead serious. His heart thudded once hard, cold, definitive. He wasn't going to protest for justice. He was going to purchase it. Rewrite the bylaws. Set the dress code. Flip the narrative so completely they'd choke on their exclusivity. But just before he could reply again, a second alert popped up. New document found. Employee termination file. Howard Ellington. Marcus froze. That name wasn't just familiar. It was his father's. The document's date read 1990. The termination reason. Conflicting image with brand. Marcus stared at the screen, pulse racing. His father was once tied to Velvet, then erased. This wasn't just systemic. It was personal. Very personal. Marcus didn't sleep that night, not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. The revelation that his father, Howard Ellington, had once been tied to Velvet, and then erased from its history like a typo, hit harder than the bouncer's rejection ever could. The past hadn't just returned. It had kicked open the door and dragged him inside. By 6 a.m. the windows in his apartment glowed with soft gray light, and Marcus was already on his 3rd cup of black coffee. The files sat open across 2 monitors, ownership maps, real estate filings, and screenshots of racist policies masquerading as brand curation. But now, this wasn't just about systemic rot. This was personal legacy twisted, buried, and begging to be reclaimed. He picked up the phone and called Alicia. She answered groggily, but sharp as ever. Tell me you're not calling me before sunrise because you've already bought the place, she murmured. Not yet, Marcus said, but I know what I'm dealing with now. She sat up audibly on the other end. You found something. More than something. Marcus replied. The chain leads up to Blackstone Hospitality, but they're hiding behind a web of LLCs. One of them, Golden Quarters Holdings, is bleeding out. Miami location tanked last quarter. And it means they're vulnerable, he said. They just don't know someone's hunting them. By mid-morning, they had a war room mapped out. Alicia called in a favor from a corporate broker friend in San Diego. Someone who specialized in distressed assets, under an alias Meridian Black Equity. They drafted a blind acquisition offer that looked clean, conservative, and hungry for growth. The cover story was tight. A group of investors wanted to expand Velvet to international markets, but preferred starting with complete control of the flagship location. The bait? A $2.7 million offer plus creative rebranding rights that suggested full financial freedom for Blackstone to walk away and save face. It's risky, Alicia said. Too low and they'll think it's disrespectful. Too high and they'll smell desperation. They already think we're outsiders, Marcus replied. Let them. By the time the offer reached the inbox of Blackstone's acquisition manager, Marcus was on a plane to Los Angeles. He needed to see it for himself. This disease wasn't just in Atlanta. The LA location of Velvet was nestled between a minimalist vegan cafe and a faux speakeasy bar that sold $22 cocktails. Gentrification had sunk its teeth into the block, but the people queued up outside the club didn't reflect the neighborhood they displaced. Marcus slipped into the line wearing a rental hoodie and old sneakers, disguised but deliberate. He stood beside a black man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered with a military posture and a weary calm. As they neared the rope, the bouncer waved the white teens through, without a second glance. The veteran stepped forward. The bouncer's eyes dropped to his feet. No sneakers, he said. These are orthopedic, the man replied calmly, flashing a VA card. Had my foot crushed in Kandahar. Not my problem. Step aside. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need to. His phone recorded silently from his chest pocket. 2 minutes later, a white teen wearing dirtier Jordans strutted in laughing, fist-bumping the bouncer. It was textbook. Next stop Chicago. Same club name. Same tactics. But this time, the casualties were emotional. 2 black college girls, both in heels, makeup and mini dresses, were told the club was at capacity. The line behind them didn't stop moving. Moments later, a group of white influencers with blue check marks on Instagram were ushered through like royalty. Marcus stood across the street, watching, recording, feeling his stomach twist. The lie wasn't just consistent, it was scalable. They had franchised racism. Back in Atlanta, Alicia's voice crackled over a late-night Zoom call.
They bit.
Marcus blinked. Wait, what?
The board.
Blackstone. They're intrigued. The shell company's CFO called my contact today. They're not committing, but they're curious. They want a private sit-down. Curious is good, Marcus said. Curious means worried. But Alicia wasn't smiling. They're going to do due diligence. If they find out who's behind Meridian Black Equity. They won't, Marcus said. We're clean. All burner proxies. Domain registered offshore. Payment route through 2 layers. Alicia leaned in closer to her webcam. Just know this, once we start this dance, we can't pull out. These aren't mom-and-pop landlords. These are people who make enemies disappear with lawsuits. Then we don't become enemies, Marcus replied. We become their best offer. She paused, then asked softly, is this really about the club anymore? Marcus looked down, his voice low. No, it's about what my father helped build, and what they stole. A beat of silence passed before Alicia nodded. Then let's burn the blueprint. The following day, a call came in from Alicia's broker contact. The voice was clipped, nervous. They'll sell, but the board wants it closed by end of business Monday. All cash, no contingencies. If they smell blood, they'll pull out. Marcus looked at the calendar. It was Friday, 12:03. You've got 72 hours, the broker added. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the ceiling. This was it. No longer just a plan. Now it was a race. Just as Marcus reached for his laptop, another call buzzed through. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice rasped through the line. Marcus, this is your father. We need to talk. Marcus froze, the past colliding with the present in one breath. There's something about Velvet. You don't know. Marcus didn't speak for a long time after the call ended. His father's voice still echoed in his ears. A phantom from a past he'd buried under ambition. silence, and the illusion of emotional distance. There's something about Velvet you don't know. But there wasn't time to unravel old wounds. Not now. The clock was ticking. 72 hours. That was all he had to gather over $2 million. Secure legal protections, anonymize every trace of his identity behind Meridian Black Equity, and lock the deal before the wrong person asked the right question. By 1:00 p.m., Marcus was pacing the minimalist concrete floor of his condo, voice low but commanding on his Bluetooth.
Liquidate 30% of my stock portfolio, no questions. Move it through the Cayman shell.
His wealth manager, Miles, hesitated. Marcus, that's half your startup equity. If the valuation dips, just do it. The finality in Marcus's voice was enough. A beep confirmed the order was received. That was one piece. But this war wasn't his to fight alone. Within the next 6 hours, Marcus tapped into a rarely activated list of contacts. A quiet brotherhood of Black entrepreneurs, tech founders, restaurateurs, and hotel owners, each one scarred by exclusion, microaggressions, or being not quite the right fit. He didn't pitch them. He didn't need to. He told them the story, start to finish. Every word. How he stood at Velvet's front door. How they let his white friend in. How they told him, a millionaire in tailored clothes, he didn't meet the dress code. Silence followed. Then slow, steady responses. I'm in. Tell me how much. I don't want shares. I want payback. By midnight, Marcus had secured $1.3 million in silent capital. Not venture-backed. Not corporate. Just black hands reaching into black wallets to buy something none of them could ever walk into without being questioned. Meanwhile, Alicia worked in shadows. Every document filed under Meridian Black Equity was airlocked. No real names, no direct addresses. Everything run through a third-party law firm, with encrypted correspondence. The offer was real. The identity behind it wasn't. She operated from a nondescript office in Buckhead, using burner emails and untraceable server networks. Her job wasn't just to push papers, it was to keep Marcus invisible. I can get the deal signed, she said over a secure line. But if anyone ties you to this before the wire transfer, they'll back out. Marcus was already aware. Velvet's parent company wasn't just elitist, it was paranoid. The slightest sign that a black man was attempting to own their flagship brand could trigger sabotage, restructured licenses, hostile reversals, or worse, pulling the property from the table. So Marcus stayed in the dark, but he watched everything. His surveillance team, made up of 2 freelance security auditors and a former club manager from Miami, fed him hourly updates from Velvet Atlanta. Staff got a memo this morning, the Miami contact reported. Said, potential new ownership. Stay professional. Expect inspection. Marcus grinned without smiling. They were bracing. And they had no idea it was him. Still, caution lingered in every move he made. Every burner phone was rotated. Every contract was double-signed. Marcus even switched hotels twice to avoid patterns. He couldn't afford to be seen. Not yet. That night, lying on a thin hotel mattress in Decatur, Marcus stared at the ceiling, the hum of the AC masking his thoughts. The adrenaline had faded just enough to let in memory. 17 years old. Target store. He'd walked in with earbuds and a hoodie shopping for a backpack. Security followed him down the aisles. Asked him twice if he needed help. When he reached the register, a manager appeared and asked him to empty his pockets. They found nothing, but made him sit in the back room anyway, until his mother arrived. Tears in her eyes, fire in her voice. That humiliation never left him. And tonight, it fueled him. He wasn't buying a club. He was reclaiming every time someone decided he didn't belong. He was walking into history with his head high, wearing a blazer and a name no one could erase. The following morning, Sunday 7:03 a.m., a text came through. Alicia, contracts finalized. Wire transfer window set. All we need is your final signature and funds cleared by Monday 3 p.m. Marcus stared at it, then exhaled. He was close. So close. But the pressure was building. The quiet kind. The one that stalked success when it belonged to the wrong skin. The media hadn't caught wind yet, but small rumors were beginning to flicker. A blog post had surfaced speculating Velvet Atlanta may be undergoing black-owned rebranding. It hadn't picked up traction yet. Marcus emailed the blogger, under a fake PR firm alias, threatening a libel suit. The post was down in hours. No leaks. No slips. Not yet. Late that evening, as Marcus triple-checked his offshore routing slips, His phone rang again. This time, the number was one of Alicia's intermediaries. He answered cautiously. A male voice, neutral but firm. Velvet's parent company wants a meeting. Marcus went still. Face to face. The voice added. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. private location. Midtown. They want to meet the buyer. Marcus's throat dried. But he started. They said if it's anonymous, deal's off. He ended the call. The silence was absolute. He stared at the wall. The whole plan had depended on secrecy. He wasn't supposed to show up. But they were pulling him into the room now. On their terms. Marcus texted Alicia. They want me to show up. Personally. She called instantly. Marcus, don't. If they know it's you, they'll burn the deal. I know, he said, voice low. But I think someone already told them. Silence. Then Alicia whispered, almost afraid to ask. Who? Marcus's face went cold. I think it was my father. The elevator glided to a silent stop on the 26th floor of a glass and steel midtown high-rise. The air was cooler here, sterile with money and expectation. Marcus checked his reflection in the elevator's mirrored walls. Clean-shaven, designer frames with clear lenses, and a dark navy suit tailored just enough to blend in but not stand out. He had traded his usual quiet confidence for something calculated, precise diction, subtle restraint, and the practiced nods of men who grew up with a silver spoon. Today he wasn't Marcus Ellington. He was Miss Mary, a silent representative of Meridian Black Equity, a fabricated investor group with just enough international ambiguity to raise eyebrows without raising questions. He stepped into the boardroom like a shadow. 7 men were already seated around the smoked glass table, sipping mineral water and flipping through glossy pitch packets. Each of them wore the same expression, amused indifferent. To them he was just another faceless buyer from an anonymous syndicate, a step between their profits and their next vineyard acquisition. None of them recognized him, not even the 2 who had quietly reviewed the surveillance footage from the Atlanta location after the bouncer incident. He was too polished, too careful. He had erased every edge that screamed black disruptor and painted himself in corporate camouflage. A middle-aged man, with a tan linen jacket, and a Rolex that screamed generational wealth, leaned back and muttered under his breath. At least it's not one of those woke activist groups trying to rebrand nightlife. Laughter rippled softly through the room. Marcus didn't blink. He let the moment pass, his face unreadable. Beneath the table, his hand tightened slightly on the leather folio he carried inside. Documents Alicia had drafted to strategically shift the deal without their full awareness. They thought they were selling their club to another version of themselves. They had no idea they were handing the keys to the man they once shoved off the velvet rope like trash. The presentation began. Marcus kept his responses short, his tone measured. When they asked about future goals, he used phrases like market repositioning, aesthetic brand update, and demographic calibration, all code for a radical cultural shift they wouldn't understand until it was too late. When one executive raised concern over brand dilution, Marcus leaned in slightly and said, "We're not diluting. We're expanding cultural resonance through localized inclusion." They nodded like they understood. They didn't. They never did. In the final review, Marcus introduced one subtle clause, buried in the appendix under brand evolution framework. It gave the new owner full authority over staffing policy, brand name, and experiential design. It was disguised in legalese, so dense none of them noticed the magnitude. It wasn't just ownership, it was erasure and rebirth, buried in a footnote. As the vote began, one older board member, a hawk-eyed man with Wall Street scars, hesitated. "Frankly, I think the offer's too low. Velvet could recover next quarter." Miami was an outlier. Another shrugged. "Then you buy it. The rest of us are out." In the end, it was 6-1. The sale was approved. The motion passed. The room didn't erupt in celebration. These men didn't cheer for exits. They just stood, shook hands, and mentally moved on. One even joked, "You'll find the nightlife crowd difficult to tame. Don't be surprised if your staff gets too diverse too fast." Marcus smiled without showing teeth. "We're comfortable with complexity," he replied. No one caught the fire behind his words. The final signatures were penned. A notary stamped the documents. The time read 2:41 p.m. The transfer was official. The club that had turned Marcus away for wearing too much melanin was now under his control. He left the boardroom quietly, without fanfare. He didn't look back. In the hallway, he finally let out the breath he didn't know he was holding. Alicia texted just one word. "Done." He replied, "Everything. Her answer, even the name rights. You can bury Velvet, if you want to. He stared at that text for a long time. That night the city thrummed with its usual Friday rhythm. Cars honking, music pulsing, heels clacking across pavement. Velvet Atlanta was in full swing, its lights strobing across the sky like a pulse too arrogant to die. But inside something was different. The staff sensed it. The air carried something heavier than usual. They had heard whispers that new ownership was coming, that someone powerful had bought them out. But no memo had arrived yet. No manager had said anything. Only vague promises to stay professional. At exactly 12:01 a.m., Marcus stepped out of a black SUV and approached the club's entrance. He wore the same charcoal blazer he'd worn the night they turned him away. Same posture, same poise. But this time, he didn't stop at the velvet rope. He didn't flinch when the new bouncer, who didn't recognize him, stepped forward to ask for ID. Marcus simply raised his hand. "Tell your general manager," he said, his voice calm and slow, "the owner has arrived." The bouncer furrowed his brow, unsure whether to laugh or call security. Marcus waited. Inside, through the crowd, and the music, and the half-lit corridors of curated exclusivity, word began to travel. "He's here." Staff paused. The general manager, slick-haired and rattled, walked toward the front. When he opened the door and saw Marcus standing there, time froze. "Mr. Mary?" he asked cautiously. Marcus shook his head. "No. My name is Marcus Ellington. I'm the one you locked out. And now I own this place." The general manager's mouth opened. But before he could speak, Marcus's phone vibrated in his jacket. A new message flashed from Alicia. "Emergency. Pull aside immediately. Blackstone just filed a last-minute motion to block the sale. You have less than an hour." Marcus turned slowly, locking eyes with the manager. "This place will still be mine. But first I have to go shut down a war." The moment Marcus stepped out of the black SUV for the second time that night, the city felt quieter, not because the noise had died, but because it no longer mattered. The bass from Velvet's speakers still thumped through the concrete. The line outside still pulsed with anticipation and curated desperation, but none of it carried the weight it had days ago. That night, when Marcus had been pushed back from the rope like he didn't belong, still burned fresh in his mind. But tonight wasn't about the burn, it was about the blueprint. He stepped forward calmly, cutting through the humidity, tailored coat swaying gently in the warm night breeze. In his hand was a slim black leather folder containing every signature, seal, and permit needed to confirm what no one outside his circle had yet realized. Marcus Ellington owned the club that once refused to let him breathe on its property, and as fate would demand, standing in front of the velvet rope, smirking under the dim awning, was Nick. The same Nick. Same frame, same crossed arms, same judgmental smirk. The man who had once used his job to shield systemic bias behind buzzwords like policy and standards. Tonight his eyes scanned Marcus's outfit with the same rehearsed detachment. "Need to see your ID," he grunted. Marcus said nothing at first. He let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until Nick's eyebrows knit in confusion. Then, softly but with purpose, Marcus replied, "I own this place." Nick snorted. "Cool story, bro. You trying lines now?" Marcus opened the folder. Inside were 5 neatly clipped documents: title transfer, liquor license reassignment, brand property rights, internal handover memo, and city permit clearance, all notarized, all official. He held them out one by one, each like a dagger wrapped in linen. "These say otherwise." Nick didn't reach for them. He stared, face caught somewhere between confusion and irritation. "What kind of prank? Call your general manager," Marcus interrupted. "Right now." A tense minute later, the double doors swung open, and out came Michael Rhodes, the club's general manager. His face, usually animated with the smug cool of someone who managed one of Atlanta's trendiest hotspots, drained of color the second he saw Marcus. His steps slowed. His mouth twitched. Marcus didn't speak. He just raised the permit in his left hand and let it rest between them. Michael snatched it like a lifeline, scanned the stamp, then the signatories, and froze. This can't be right." Marcus pulled out his phone, tapped a contact, and handed the call to Michael. "That's your new legal counsel. They'll explain everything." Michael didn't move at first. Then, reluctantly, he took the phone. "This is Michael Rhodes, general manager of Velvet Atlanta." His voice faltered. His posture slumped. His shoulders dropped, And by the time he handed the phone back, Marcus didn't need to ask. You're the new owner? Michael whispered. The words barely made it past his throat. Yes, Marcus replied, effective immediately. Michael stepped aside without another word. Word traveled like electricity. Inside, staff paused mid-pour. Bartenders looked at each other. The house DJ stopped the music, mid-transition. Security guards flinched toward their radios. The words came in murmurs. Then louder. It's him. That guy. The one from last week. He owns the club. Marcus stepped inside slowly, eyes sweeping the space. The lights hadn't changed. The music hadn't changed. The scent of overpriced tequila and expensive perfume still hung in the air. But everything felt different, like the bones of the place had shifted. Nick had followed a few paces behind, unsure whether to stand tall or vanish. Marcus turned to him, his voice level. You remember me? Nick swallowed. Look, man, I was just doing your job? Marcus interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Funny. Your job involved letting in 3 underdressed white men after turning me away, then calling security when I asked to speak to someone above you. I didn't mean. You didn't have to mean it. You executed it. Nick opened his mouth again, but Marcus raised a hand. You're relieved. Effective now. Your final check will be mailed. You're not to return here again. Nick hesitated like he wanted to argue. Then his shoulders sagged, and he turned to leave. He didn't look back. Marcus didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He walked through the space like a surgeon preparing for an operation. By the time he reached the staff lounge behind the bar, a dozen employees were waiting. Bartenders, waitresses, line managers, coat check workers, some wide-eyed, some guilt-ridden. One woman, maybe in her early 20s, trembled slightly. Marcus stepped up and took a breath. I'm not here for revenge, he said. I'm here to rebuild. And let me say this plainly, racism won't survive in this building. Not in policy, not in practice, not in silence. No one spoke, he continued. If you've ever looked the other way because you feared losing your job, you're not alone. I get it. I've been on the other side of that fear. But silence protects the system. It doesn't protect you. That ends now. You're not just pouring drinks or watching doors. You're shaping experiences. For every guest who walks in here wondering if they belong, wondering if they'll be seen or judged or profiled, you are the front line. What you do matters. A tall, nervous barback stepped forward. What if we speak up now? About what's happened? Then you'll be protected, Marcus said. And heard. That's when the unexpected cracked through the tension. The young woman who'd been trembling earlier, Carmen, a server, stepped forward and began to cry. I told my manager about what Nick did. 3 times. He laughed, said Nick has the best eye for the brand. I thought if I pushed more I'd lose my hour. Marcus nodded once, slowly. Not anymore. Carmen broke down. Another bartender hugged her. A line manager stepped forward. We all knew. We just didn't know we'd ever get someone who gave a damn. Marcus stayed another hour, taking notes, listening to confessions, and sketching out a plan. A real plan. New training. Anonymous reporting protocols. Fair audition practices for DJs. Uniform dress code enforcement across all guests. But above all, culture shift. Outside, the line continued forming, unaware that the ground beneath them had shifted. Then, without warning, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text. No name, just a photo. It showed Marcus standing outside the club earlier that evening. Documents in hand. Posture calm, eyes set forward. Captioned underneath it were 8 words that exploded like wildfire across the internet. The man they denied just bought the whole damn club. Within minutes, the post hit 500,000 shares. Marcus stared at his screen as hundreds of tags, mentions, and media requests flooded in. Then his phone rang. An unknown number. He answered. Mr. Ellington, the voice said coolly. You just made some very powerful enemies. Marcus barely slept that night. Not because of stress, but because his phone wouldn't stop vibrating. By 6:42 a.m., the photo had crossed 3 million views. It had started on Twitter, just one image. Grainy and slightly angled, snapped by someone in line outside the club. Marcus at the entrance, documents in hand, eyes steady. The caption didn't need a marketing team. It was raw and perfect. The man they denied just bought the whole damn club. The internet didn't scroll past that. It devoured it. By morning, the hashtags were climbing. Do added. Flip. Denied then owned. Black ownership. Reclaim the door. Influencers reposted it with quotes like, "Now that's how you clap back." Civil rights pages framed it as a generational victory. When legacy meets resistance. TikTokers did dramatic reenactments. News commentators went live. The narrative didn't even need spinning. It was self-generating. A man publicly denied entry to a club because of how he looked, then quietly bought the franchise. It was a parable, a revenge arc, a modern myth happening in real time. Marcus sat on his hotel bed, watching the story grow like a wildfire he hadn't meant to light. On his screen, a video montage began circulating. The Velvet security footage of him being turned away synced over swelling music, cut with the final frame of him walking in. As the new owner, the comments section was a storm of support, admiration, and disbelief. But beneath the surface, the complexity was building. By noon, a producer from a national morning show emailed Alicia's law office asking for an exclusive interview. Another from a streaming platform offered a documentary rights deal. A major podcast messaged his Instagram, asking for a 10-minute voice note response. None of them got it. Marcus stayed silent. Alicia's warning the night before had stuck like a stone under his ribs. The media's not your friend. They'll twist your silence into arrogance, your confidence into ego, your privacy into guilt. This isn't just a victory. It's bait. He knew she was right. Because along with the adoration came something colder. A right-wing blog published a smug op-ed within hours of the story going viral. Its headline screamed, "He didn't win, he just bought vengeance." The author accused Marcus of playing the race card in a luxury deck, arguing that his ownership proved he was never truly excluded, just momentarily inconvenienced. The tone dripped with sarcasm masked as analysis. If you can afford to buy the club, maybe it's not racism, it's ego. But that wasn't the gut punch. It was the statement released by the franchise's former ownership group, Blackstone Hospitality. Their PR crafted it, like an apology without apology. While we understand the public is enthusiastic about the new chapter at Velvet, we want to reaffirm that the club has always operated with professionalism, inclusive values, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. We wish the new owner well in his journey. No acknowledgement of the incident. No admission. Just corporate gaslighting, polished into a press release. Marcus read it twice, then a third time. He tossed his phone aside and stared at the ceiling. This was how the system survived. It didn't scream anymore. It smiled and erased, smoothed the edges, pretended you were always welcome, once you owned the damn building. That night, as he walked the perimeter of the newly acquired property with an interior architect to begin discussing design changes, his phone pinged again. This time, a message request.
Not public.
Not media. Just one DM. The profile had no picture. The name was a string of numbers. He hesitated, then tapped. "They're going to come for you next. Be ready." That was it. 8 words. No link. No location. Just that. His pulse didn't quicken immediately. Not out of fear, but clarity. This wasn't about internet fame. Not really. It was about disruption. About what happened when a black man stepped out of the narrative they'd assigned him. Victim, visitor, consumer, and rewrote the story as owner. The message could have been a bluff, but Marcus knew better. Because power didn't lose quietly. He'd embarrassed them. And someone somewhere wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. Marcus tapped Alicia's number. Before she could even say hello, he said, "The gloves are off. I need surveillance on my phone, my condo, and the club. Now." Then he looked out the window and noticed something chilling. A man in a beige suit, who had no reason to be standing outside, was watching him. Not recording, not talking, just watching. By the third day after the photo went viral, the shine had started to rot. The comments under Marcus's name were no longer unanimous in celebration. What had begun as poetic justice had twisted into something uglier, something predictable. The internet, with its endless hunger, had started peeling back layers it was never invited to touch. Marcus Ellington, the black man who'd flipped rejection into ownership, was now being framed as an opportunist, a corporate agitator, and in the darkest corners of the web, much worse. Velvet's inbox flooded with anonymous hate. The subject lines were venom, "You don't belong. Go back to your place. You think owning a club makes you white?" The body of one email had a single image, a burning cross. No words, just the picture. Then, someone mailed a noose. It arrived in a plain brown box, tied with careful precision and left hanging on the club's front door handle at dawn. The security camera caught it. One frame, Low quality, a hooded figure disappearing into the shadows. Marcus watched the footage 3 times, then took a long breath and called the police. When the officer arrived, a white man in his mid-30s with a sunburned face and mirrored sunglasses, he didn't even write the report at first, just stared at the noose like it was a prank prop. Marcus stood in front of him, hands folded calmly. This was meant to terrorize, not scare. There's a difference. The officer chuckled. You sure it's not just a publicity stunt? Y'all been making headlines. Marcus blinked slowly. So your position is, I sent myself a noose? The officer shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time someone did something wild for attention. Alicia arrived 15 minutes later, eyes flaring. She nearly tore the report form from his clipboard. Right. The damn incident. Report, she said through clenched teeth. We're logging this as a federal threat. The officer sighed and finally started scribbling. No apology, no urgency, just another form to file. The moment he left, Alicia called the city attorney's office. She didn't ask for anything. She demanded, but City Hall stalled. Politely, with vague deferrals and references to limited jurisdiction. No one wanted to touch it. We don't have clear proof, one official said. You have a noose, Alicia replied coldly. That's proof of history. Marcus sat in silence through the entire call, watching the sun slant through the windows like a slow accusation. This was how systemic racism fought back, not with direct denials, but with inertia, with silence, with tired smirks behind bureaucratic desks. But Marcus didn't back down. He went bigger. 3 days later, he stood behind a podium on the courthouse steps, facing a wall of cameras. He wore a dark blue suit and no tie, casual enough to be disarming, formal enough to command. The club's new logo glowed on the banner behind him. The entry. His voice was calm, but it sliced like glass. This isn't about one club, he began. This is about every locked door we've ever had to knock on twice. Every no dressed up as a dress code. Every job interview that was already decided before we shook hands. Every smile that hides a refusal. He paused. Let silence breathe. This isn't vengeance. It's visibility. I'm not here to make noise. I'm here to build rooms that never needed a passcode. The press conference went viral before he even stepped off the stairs. Clips were posted with captions like, "The door is open now." Civil rights groups reposted it. Black business owners in cities across the country started tagging their own locations with the entry movement. For the first time, the hate was being drowned, not by rebuttals, but by momentum. The club itself was reborn. Gone was Velvet's old signage. In its place, sleek, bold letters, carved into backlit steel, the entry. The doors had been reimagined to include a rotating mural of Atlanta's cultural icons. Black musicians, poets, teachers, community builders. The dress code? Clear and equal. If your shoes were clean and your ID was valid, you were welcome, period. Opening night arrived like thunder. Lines wrapped around the block. People flew in from other states. A black mother in her 60s clutched her daughter's arm and whispered, I never thought I'd see this. Inside, the music didn't just bump, it healed. Old school, new school, Afrobeat, soul, Latin drums, Atlanta trap. It blended like history itself was dancing. Marcus walked through the crowd, nodding gently. He wasn't looking for recognition. He was looking for breath, for that deep inhale that finally felt earned. He moved through the redesigned VIP lounge, where the couches weren't just leather anymore. They were etched with quotes from Maya Angelou, James Baldwin, Audre Lorde. The menus featured cocktails, named after unsung black innovators. The walls no longer displayed fashion ads. They carried framed letters of protest, resilience, love. He stepped toward the back hallway, where the noise dimmed just enough to breathe. And that's when he saw him, standing near the wall, just past the last spotlight, wearing an old charcoal blazer and worn-out loafers that looked 20 years past trend, but still carried dignity. Howard Ellington, his father. The man who hadn't spoken to Marcus in nearly 18 years. The man who once stormed out of their home with a suitcase and rage he never unpacked. The man who once told Marcus, you can fight the system or survive it. You can't do both. And now here he was. Not smiling, not crying, just watching. Marcus stopped cold. The music faded into a muffled blur. The past collided with the present. Two timelines locked in one breath. Howard stepped forward slowly. His voice was low, worn, but solid. Didn't think I'd get past security, he said, almost joking. Marcus didn't answer right away. Howard looked up at the sign above the hallway, the entry. Then back at his son. You did it, he said. You actually did it. Marcus exhaled sharply. Why are you here? Howard shrugged. Maybe to see if the boy they wouldn't let in became the man who'd never wait in line again. A long silence passed. Then Marcus said, They sent a noose. Left it on the front door. Howard's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. And you still opened those doors? Marcus nodded. Then you're not just my son, Howard said. You're the version of me I never had the courage to become. Marcus didn't know how to reply to that. He just stood there, staring at the man who once disappeared, and now stood in the very place neither of them had ever been allowed to dream into reality. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Staff members rushed toward Marcus, whispering urgently, There's a man outside. Press badge. Says he has proof this entire sale was illegal. Marcus turned, eyes narrowing, and behind the staff pushing through the door, came a man holding a folder labeled, Franchise Dispute. Blackstone Internal Documents. For a long time Marcus just stared. The press folder. The crowd. The music swelling behind him. None of it existed in that moment. Not when Howard Ellington stood just a few feet away. Not when the man Marcus had trained himself to forget showed up uninvited, unannounced, but unshakably real. 18 years. 18 years since the night Howard walked out the door, slamming it behind him, with words neither of them had the courage to take back. Marcus had been 14. Howard was already unraveling. Quiet rage mixed with the ache of a man, forced to swallow his dignity too many times. He'd just been fired from a high-end hotel in Buckhead, after a white couple accused him of making them uncomfortable for suggesting their toddler not run into the kitchen. The hotel called it a safety precaution. HR called it a customer service failure. Marcus's mother had called it what it was, racism dressed as policy. But Howard didn't fight. He packed a bag, and then he disappeared. Now here he was standing in the club his son owned, in the building he once couldn't walk into without being watched. You look like your mother, Howard said first, voice dry, raspy with time. Strong shoulders. Straight back. She never bowed. Marcus didn't move. Why are you here? Howard took a step closer. I saw you on TV. At the courthouse. Your name. Your face. That crowd. You said something about knocking on locked doors. His voice caught slightly. I was one of those doors, wasn't I? Marcus clenched his jaw. You weren't locked. You left. Howard nodded. No defense in his posture. And I regret it. Every day since. The words weren't heavy. They were simple. Too simple. Almost. Marcus wanted to yell, to push, to question how a man could just show up after nearly 2 decades and try to fill in the spaces like nothing cracked. But Howard wasn't finished.
I didn't come just for an apology, he said. I came with a warning.
Marcus narrowed his eyes. Go on. There's a man named Dennis Rowe, Howard said. Old money, real estate and hospitality circles. He's been circling Velvet for years. Tried to buy out the parent company 3 times. Lost every time. When they sold to you, it was the final insult. Marcus stiffened. He knew the name. Alicia had flagged it in a minor memo. An attempted bidder who had threatened market retaliation if outmaneuvered. He's not just mad, Howard continued. He's vindictive, quiet, surgical, buys judges, plants stories, ruins reputations until no one wants to work with you. That folder the press guy had. That's Rowe. He's already moving. Marcus didn't speak. The sting of the past blurred with the urgency of the present. Howard stepped closer, voice dropping. These people don't lose, Marcus. And when they do, they burn what they can't buy. Marcus stared at him, searching for cracks, for deceit, for guilt. Instead, he saw something else. Fear, yes, but also pride. A glint of something Howard had buried long ago. Still resentment clawed beneath the surface. You left Mom to raise us alone, Marcus said quietly. You didn't even show up to her funeral. I spoke her eulogy to an empty chair you were supposed to be in. Howard's face twisted. I couldn't face what I'd become. I let shame grow until it took the place of every phone call I should have made. And now you show up when cameras are rolling. Marcus snapped. No, Howard said firmly. I showed up because you're the only thing I ever built that survived. The silence after that was brutal. Raw, but not empty. Finally, Marcus spoke. You want to see what legacy looks like when it's built with something other than rage? Howard nodded. then stay one night. That night, they walked to the club together. Not as father and son. Not yet. But as two men haunted by the same structure, one of whom had managed to outlive it. Marcus showed him the redesigned bar, run by two black women, who once couldn't get bartender roles in any club north of Midtown. He showed him the mural wall, where local artists painted weekly themes of black excellence. He showed him the back office where policies were being written that included equity bonuses, mental health days, and anonymous reporting structures. Howard said little, but he watched everything. At one point, he paused at a wall installation of Marcus's mother, a framed photograph of her teaching a community class in South Atlanta, beneath the words, "We walk through the doors we build." Howard whispered, "She'd be proud." Marcus just nodded. That night they sat in silence in the owner's lounge, sipping whiskey. No arguments. No revelations. Just time folding in on itself. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel like he was running. He felt anchored. Until the morning came. Marcus arrived at the club at 7:14 a.m., expecting to meet with the interior architect for Phase 2 planning. Instead, he found his office door ajar. Inside, papers were everywhere. Cabinets pulled open. Screens glowing with lines of data. His server had been hacked. His files, the full investor list, routing accounts, equity distribution. Everything had been dumped. He rushed to his desk, opened his laptop, and froze.
There it was.
A link. Anonymous leak. Who really owns the entry? Attached were spreadsheets, tax records, internal Slack messages, and partial contracts, all stripped of context, all designed to make Marcus look like a front for shadowy operations. He scrolled down and found one spreadsheet highlighted. It listed Howard Ellington's name, with a consultant fee next to it. A trap. Someone had planted it, twisting legacy into scandal. Marcus leaned back slowly, realization dawning like ice across his chest. A ping hit his inbox, a message from a major news outlet. "We're running a story tonight on your hidden financial backers. Care to comment before it breaks?" Marcus looked toward the security cameras and realized they hadn't just leaked his data. They had eyes inside. It started with a declined transaction. Marcus had stopped by a local black-owned bakery to place a catering order for an upcoming community access night at the entry. The card reader blinked red. He tried another account. Same result. The clerk looked up awkwardly. "Maybe your bank flagged it," she said kindly, not knowing that Marcus Ellington's accounts weren't the kind that got flagged. An hour later, the truth unraveled like thread. 3 of his personal and business accounts were frozen, pending fraud verification. According to the bank's automated line, his startup's reserve fund showed a zero balance on its dashboard. Although the money hadn't been withdrawn, it had been placed in temporary lockdown. Marcus called Alicia immediately. Within 10 minutes, she called back with the voice she used when war was incoming. "You've been hit with a coordinated freeze order," she said. "Filed anonymously. The banks won't tell us who flagged the activity, but it's coming from someone with financial leverage in those institutions." Marcus closed his eyes. "Roe." Alicia exhaled into the phone. "I'm already digging." She didn't need to say his full name. Dennis Rowe, hospitality mogul, real estate shark, and the man who had nearly bought Velvet before Marcus slid in anonymously and outbid him, was infamous for what the press called clean competition. But anyone who worked within striking distance knew better. Rowe didn't just lose gracefully. He retaliated quietly, surgically, with the kind of precision only generational wealth and white corporate insulation could afford. By noon, Marcus's calendar began to fracture. 3 sponsors pulled out of the entry's upcoming community gala. One of them, a high-end beverage distributor, issued a statement citing financial concerns over operational transparency. It read like it had been written by a lawyer under duress. Another partner who had been funding youth mentorship dinners ghosted him completely. No calls, no texts, just gone. The smear campaign began to spread with surgical consistency. An anonymous blog published an investigative article accusing Marcus of embezzling startup capital to purchase the entry. The piece was filled with half-truths, twisted data, and doctored screenshots. None verifiable, all viral. By the end of the day, Marcus's inbox was filled with media requests for comment. He didn't respond. He called a war room meeting, instead. 10 of his core investors joined him at the entry's back office. A mix of tech entrepreneurs, educators, real estate veterans, and artists. Some had flown in from New York and Detroit. One woman canceled a speaking engagement at Harvard just to be in the room. They knew what was coming. They just needed to know how hard it would hit. Marcus stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, jaw clenched, for the first time since they'd built this vision. He looked less like a founder and more like a commander. They froze our money, he began. They're targeting our credibility, and they're counting on us to shrink. The room was silent. They're not just angry that we won, he said. They're angry we didn't ask permission. A few nodded. One investor muttered, "They're trying to teach you a lesson." Marcus's eyes sharpened. "Then let's give them a test they can't pass." He walked to the whiteboard and circled one word: expansion. They thought we couldn't enter. Now they're mad we redesigned the whole damn building. Let's show them we're not a fluke. We're a movement. He outlined a plan to acquire the remaining Velvet franchises, 8 clubs spread across the country. Each location operated under outdated, exclusionary branding. Some were already bleeding money. Others were tied to quietly racist hiring practices that could be flipped into legal leverage. Alicia joined the call on speaker. "I've already started outreach under Meridian Black Equity," she said. 4 locations are owned by secondary firms who don't know Marcus is behind the bid. If we move quickly, we can secure 5 of the 8 before Rowe knows what hit him. One of the investors, Darnell, who had once been denied a business loan because the bank didn't understand urban hospitality, grinned. "We're about to turn Velvet into a cautionary tale." They left the meeting ignited, not intimidated. Marcus stood last, alone, staring at the whiteboard. Expansion. Not out of ego, out of necessity. Because if they could erase one success story with a few fake emails and legal traps, they'd do it to the next 20 just as easily. He walked through the club that evening as staff set up for the week's programming. Carmen, the server who'd once cried when Marcus promised protection, smiled as she adjusted the lighting. The mural on the west wall featured a collage of black youth with headphones, notebooks, and books. Education as armor. Every piece of this space mattered. Every brick. And Rowe wanted to turn it all into rubble. Back in his office, Marcus poured himself a glass of still water and opened his email. There it was. A new message. Subject line: urgent legal action. Velvet, Los Angeles. He opened the attachment and read. A lawsuit filed by a shadow subsidiary of Rowe's investment firm, claiming breach of intellectual property tied to the Velvet name, even though Marcus had legally rebranded his Atlanta location. The suit claimed emotional damage, brand dilution, and intentional sabotage of customer loyalty. It was a joke, but a dangerous one, because it was being filed in a district court known for favoring big business. Marcus leaned back slowly. He wasn't angry. He was focused. Just as he closed the file, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. A voice, cold and composed, said, "You bought one club. We own the rest of the map. Time to fold your hand before we flip the table." Marcus didn't respond, but his silence didn't end the call. The voice continued. "Next we come for your investors. You'll be surprised how fast loyalty runs out when legacy's on the line." Marcus had faced firestorms before, but this one arrived with a legal header and a 48-hour response window. The subject line was clinical. Notice of civil suit. Velvet West LLC v. Marcus Ellington. But the contents were anything but neutral. According to the complaint filed in Los Angeles Superior Court, Marcus was being accused of brand defamation, intellectual property misappropriation, and intentional interference with future revenue. The heart of the lawsuit was a damning claim that his viral story, rebranding to the entry, and national exposure had irreparably harmed Velvet's market reputation. The irony wasn't lost on him. Racism dressed up in contracts again, this time with velvet gloves and a courtroom address. Alicia read the documents twice, pacing the office like a storm. This isn't just a nuisance suit. If this sticks, they can freeze your assets mid-expansion. You'll lose the buyout leverage, and the entry brand goes into lockdown until trial ends. That's a year minimum. Marcus didn't blink. This was never about LA. It's Rowe. He's propping up a dying franchise to choke me at the gate. Alicia nodded slowly, and someone's greasing the court wheels. This was fast-tracked to a hearing in 5 days. No civil case moves this quick, unless someone's pulling favors. Within 24 hours, Marcus was on a plane to Los Angeles. First class was quiet, almost sterile, but his mind raced. He knew how Rowe operated. He wouldn't attack directly. He'd hide behind boards and shell companies, creating chaos while remaining untouchable. When he landed, Marcus skipped the hotel. Instead, he headed straight to Velvet La, located off a gentrified strip in Silver Lake. From the outside, It still wore the air of exclusivity, matte black exterior, gold-lettered logo, subtle rooftop lighting. But inside, the rot was visible. The manager's posture was tense, the staff distracted. Marcus, wearing a discreet body cam under his collar, posed as a curious investor looking into licensing opportunities. The assistant manager, a tired Latina woman named Sandra, leaned in during a lull in their conversation. "You didn't hear it from me," she whispered, but the staff's scared. 2 bartenders quit last week, said something about HR files getting erased. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Erased? Complaints. Gone. Like they were never submitted. Especially the race stuff. DJ Rich got canned for playing too much Kendrick. But they said it was for brand inconsistency. She snorted. Guess white pop songs about Molly fit the vibe better. Over the next 2 days, Marcus gathered quiet testimonies. Former employees confirmed the trend. Racist dress codes, discriminatory entry, performative inclusion only when camera crews showed up. A former DJ provided a copy of his termination letter. It read, "Your musical tone skews too heavily toward urban genres, inconsistent with the Velvet experience." Another employee, a black waitress, shared that she was docked hours whenever too many non-white guests showed up. She had screenshots of the manager's group texts saying tonight's crowd looks more MLK than MTV. Adjust the mood. Marcus built a file. By the morning of the hearing, Alicia flew in with a briefcase full of organized exhibits and legal armor. The courtroom was minimalist, white walls, gray chairs, and a judge who looked like she'd heard 1,000 corporate sob stories. Velvet Lay's legal team sat on the right, row conspicuously absent. His proxy, a smug man in designer glasses, opened the case with flair. "We are not here because of skin color. We are here because of market sabotage." Marcus didn't flinch. Alicia opened her defense with a single sentence. "Your Honor, this lawsuit isn't about protecting a brand. It's about protecting a lie." What followed was not just a defense. It was a dismantling. Alicia laid out the digital trail archived reviews from black customers, denied entry, emails with coded language, internal training memos that emphasized demographic balance, testimonies from LA, Chicago, Atlanta. Even the previously sealed settlement from Kayla Ellis's case in 2022 was entered into evidence. Then Marcus took the stand. His voice didn't shake. His hands didn't fidget. He looked the judge in the eye and began not with vengeance, but memory. "I was told I didn't meet the dress code. While wearing a tailored blazer, I was pushed back from a place that played our music, used our culture, and sold it back to us, but refused to see us." He paused. "This isn't about destroying Velvet. It's about making sure Velvet doesn't keep destroying people. Silently. Profitably." The courtroom was still. The judge asked a few sharp questions. Rose's team stammered through half-prepared responses. By 3:42 p.m., the gavel struck. The judge's ruling was clear. Case dismissed with prejudice. But she didn't stop there. She turned to the plaintiffs. "In light of documented patterns of discriminatory behavior presented in this hearing, this court is granting the defendant access to the financial and HR records of the Velvet corporate structure for further review under potential civil rights violations." Alicia froze. Marcus blinked once. It wasn't just a win. It was an opening. They had cracked the door to the entire empire. Back at the hotel that night, Marcus sat with a USB drive loaded with new files, a data dump from court-authorized access. Alicia, exhausted but electrified, poured them both whiskey. "You realize what this is," she said. Marcus nodded slowly. "We're inside now." He opened the financials, scanning line after line. Names, transfers, old ownership structures, payout logs. Then he froze. A name jumped out, buried in a 1990s acquisition contract, from the original Velvet Foundation documents. Howard L. Ellington. Position, co-founder. There it was. In legal black and white. His father hadn't just worked at a hospitality venue. He helped start the original Velvet, before being bought out and erased. Marcus's hands trembled slightly. Alicia leaned in. "That's your father?" He nodded, then scrolled down. Another line. Termination clause. Ellington's contribution shall be absorbed under consultancy to protect the brand's market optics. They didn't just remove him. They whitewashed him. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You found his name, but you haven't found the real reason they buried it. Ask your father what he signed to protect you." Marcus stared at the message, chest tightening. Something deeper was buried in the past, and it had Marcus's name all over it. Marcus sat alone in the dim hotel suite, the only light coming from his laptop screen. The name glared back at him, bold and undeniable. Howard L. Ellington, co-founder. A time-stamped contract from 1989 proved what he'd never imagined. His father hadn't just worked around the edges of Velvet, he had helped build it, brick by invisible brick. His pulse thundered in his ears as he reread the clause. Termination due to brand optics. The language was cold, clinical, and soaked in corporate cowardice. His father's name had been absorbed, reclassified under a consultancy so the ownership would appear whiter, cleaner, more marketable. Marcus clenched his jaw. The pattern had always been there, but this was no longer abstraction. It was blood. The next morning, before the city had shaken off its fog, Marcus flew back to Atlanta. He didn't go home. He didn't go to the entry. He went straight to his father's one-bedroom apartment on the south side, a place he'd only visited once before as a teenager, back when anger made everything look smaller. Howard opened the door in silence, already knowing. "You found it," he said. Marcus stepped inside. "Why didn't you tell me you were a founder?" Howard sat down slowly on the edge of his faded recliner. "Because they made sure the world wouldn't believe it. And for a long time, I didn't either." Marcus stood, pacing slowly. "You let me think you walked away from everything." Howard looked up, his eyes not defensive, but hollowed. "I didn't walk away, son. I was shoved. And then they locked the door behind me so tight, I convinced myself there was no door at all." Marcus sat across from him, the distance between them no longer physical. "Tell me everything." Howard exhaled, and for the first time, opened the file of his past. He had met two white investors in 1988, who wanted to open an upscale club in Atlanta with a cultural vibe. They pitched him as the creative heartbeat. His experience in community event planning and connections in the music scene were essential. Howard invested his life savings, $46,000 at the time, into the venue. He helped scout locations, designed the original music curation model, and even painted parts of the interior by hand. Then, just months after the grand opening, the investors decided to restructure. That's when the paperwork changed. Howard was asked to sign a temporary reassignment document under the pretense of tax protection. When he asked questions, he was told he was slowing down progress. When he pushed back, they offered him a severance check and a confidentiality clause. "They said my face didn't fit the image," Howard said quietly. "Said the vibe had to shift if they wanted to attract the right crowd. That meant me gone." Marcus's stomach twisted. "They buried you." Howard nodded. "And I let myself stay buried." The weight of it all hit Marcus like a flood. His ownership hadn't just been poetic, it had been prophetic. He'd unknowingly reclaimed the very legacy stolen from his father. This wasn't just justice. It was inheritance. Over the next few weeks, father and son built something rare. Trust forged not in apology, but in shared creation. Howard began visiting the entry daily, not as a relic, but as a collaborator. He helped design new room layouts, introduced Marcus to old vendors who'd survived Atlanta's racial zoning wars, and even unearthed old marketing notes from the original Velvet's opening playbook. They stayed late into the night, blueprinting a different kind of expansion, not just of buildings, but of mission. One evening, as they stood under a mural of the club's founding values, Marcus handed Howard a document. "I had Alicia draft this." Howard unfolded it. The heading read, "Amendment to the Entry Holdings, Inc." It officially named Howard L. Ellington as co-founder emeritus and strategic advisor. Howard blinked slowly. "I don't need my name on this, Marcus." Marcus replied, voice even. "You already built it. I'm just putting your name back where it always belonged." The media caught wind within days. The headlines flipped. No longer was the story just about the man who'd bought the club that rejected him. Now it was about a son rewriting a stolen legacy. "A son reclaims his father's stolen dream" trended nationally. News crews returned. This time they captured Howard leading a tour of the new architecture plans. Marcus beside him, nodding quietly, the past and future standing side by side. But the storm hadn't passed. Just beneath the surface, Roe was regrouping. The expansion efforts had picked up momentum. Marcus had successfully placed acquisition offers on two more Velvet franchises, locations in Detroit and New Orleans. Both were on the verge of collapse, and the owners were eager to sell. But before the paperwork could clear, Alicia received a chilling notification. A federal injunction had been filed in district court, naming Marcus Ellington and the entry holdings as defendants in a new legal maneuver to preserve brand integrity and prevent hostile acquisition. A federal judge appointed by a political ally of Rose had agreed to review the case. The next morning, Marcus received the email. Subject: account freeze authorization, United States District Court order. All expansion funds, corporate cards, and investor accounts under the entry holdings umbrella had been locked pending legal review. Alicia's voice came over the speakerphone like a gut punch. They just froze your entire operating power. Marcus closed his laptop slowly. So they want to suffocate me. They want to stall until your momentum dies, Alicia said. And they think dragging your father's name into the legal pool will shake your foundation. Marcus stood at the balcony of the entry, watching the line form as if nothing had changed. But everything had. This was no longer about whether he could own. It was about whether he could withstand. He turned to Howard, who stood beside him quietly. They froze the accounts, Marcus said. Howard's eyes narrowed. Then we fight without them. Marcus looked back at the crowd. And if they come after you? Howard's voice didn't shake. Then I'll show them what they built when they tried to bury me. Just then, Alicia called again. Her voice this time was different, urgent. Marcus, she said. You need to see this. A federal probe was just opened into Roe. But that's not the twist. Marcus gripped the rail. What is? Alicia whispered. They're saying your mother was part of the original Velvet investor circle. There's more to this. Much more. The silence inside Marcus's office was suffocating. Every account had been frozen. Every planned expansion shuddered in limbo. And his team now looked at him with a mixture of faith and quiet fear. Payroll deadlines loomed. Vendors stopped returning calls. 2 sponsors formally withdrew from upcoming partnerships, citing financial instability. But what pierced deeper than bureaucracy was how the press began to shift. The same media outlets that once praised Marcus for poetic justice were now sharpening their language. Ambition overreach, from underdog to unstable. Too much too fast. The headlines came with glossy graphics, recycled sound bites, and no understanding of how calculated the attacks had been. Roe's influence moved like smoke, unseen but everywhere. Even influencers, those who'd championed Marcus in their Instagram reels and podcast episodes, suddenly found safer stories to tell. One posted, "Just because someone flips one club doesn't mean they understand empire." Another left a comment under a news piece saying, "Hope he didn't let fame cloud the fundamentals." The betrayal wasn't loud. It was quiet, sharp, strategic. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't argue back or hold a press conference. Instead, he returned to the south side. He remembered something his mother used to say. When systems close doors, we don't beg, we build sidewalks. So Marcus planned a sidewalk. Not a fundraiser. Not a gala. Something raw. Something honest. He called it the entry open air. It was held on a Saturday evening, outside the club. No ticket prices, no guest lists. Just long folding tables lined with hot food from local black-owned restaurants. DJs spinning protest soul, funk, and conscious rap. Portable stages. Mics open for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The neighborhood came out in force. At first by dozens, then by hundreds. By dusk, thousands filled the block. Barbers brought folding chairs and offered free lineups. Teachers passed out children's books. Single mothers carried signs that read, "This is our entry too." Marcus didn't speak until the crowd asked him to. He stepped onto the stage with no suit, no podium. Just a hoodie that read, "Legacy over leverage." "I was never meant to own this place," he said. "Not because I wasn't capable, but because the system never imagined I'd survive long enough to try." He paused. The crowd fell utterly silent. When they froze my accounts, I didn't panic. I remembered who I'm doing this for. And it's not sponsors. It's you. It's us. A woman in the front row yelled, "Say that again." Marcus smiled slightly. This club was never the destination. It was the door, and now we open it wider. A local documentary team captured everything. Interviews with elders who'd been denied entry to clubs in the 70s. Young people talking about coded rejection in modern nightlife. A former Velvet bouncer who admitted he was trained to curate the crowd visually. The footage hit social media in waves. One clip where a janitor talked about being told he was too dark for front of house went viral within hours. National attention reignited, but this time with a different energy. This wasn't just Marcus's story anymore. It was everyone's. And then came the donations. Small at first. A barber from Newark sent $40. A school cafeteria worker from Houston sent $12. A retired bus driver from Oakland sent $100, noting, "My boy never made it to the front of the line. I hope this gets you further." Marcus launched a new campaign the next morning. Own the Entry, a grassroots initiative where everyday people could buy into the expansion, $5 at a time. The website crashed twice from traffic. Within 3 days, over $400,000 poured in. And more importantly, it came with stories, thousands of them, tied to pain, pride, and persistence. Alicia called him in tears. "You just rewrote equity." Literally. Howard said nothing. He just placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder the way fathers do when words would fail. And yet behind the swell of support the tension remained. Roe had not disappeared. And Marcus knew success didn't silence systems. It threatened them. That night, the club emptied late. Staff cleaned while humming Luther Vandross, laughing about whose dance moves had been the worst. Howard lingered in the back, sipping coffee, lost in thought. Marcus stayed to lock up. He was the last one out. But as he stepped outside, he heard glass shatter. The front window, newly installed, designed to reflect the neighborhood skyline, was now fractured with a gaping hole. A brick lay on the lobby floor, surrounded by shards like a broken crown. Taped to it was a note. In thick black ink, it read, "You and your daddy better walk away." No signature. Just threat. Marcus picked it up slowly, his fingers tightening. Howard stepped beside him, silent. Then, without prompting, he reached into his coat pocket and handed Marcus a folded sheet. "Your mother's investment agreement," he said. "I found it. She wasn't just supporting me, she helped fund the original Velvet too. Her name was buried right next to mine." Marcus's breath caught. His mother. This legacy didn't just begin with him. It had been rooted in his bloodline the whole time, denied, erased, rewritten, but always there. The note in his hand burned metaphorically now. They weren't just trying to stop a man. They were trying to erase a lineage. Marcus's phone buzzed. A message from the Own the Entry account backend. He clicked it. His eyes widened. One donor had just contributed $1 million. Anonymous. With the note, "Let's finish what they never let us start." Below that, an IP address. Traced Tokyo. The glass was swept, the brick disposed of. But the message it carried echoed louder than any broken window. Marcus stood beneath the reinstalled pane 2 days later, watching a local father and his daughter trace the words stenciled on it. "This entry stays open." It wasn't just decor, it was defiance in clear view. The police, as expected, had little interest. No cameras caught the suspect's face, the officer said flatly. Could have been kids messing around. Marcus didn't argue. He didn't point to the fact that threats weren't new in this city, only the names on the leases. He simply thanked them and moved on. Instead of waiting for justice, Marcus built a firewall. Alicia fast-tracked a new partnership with a Black-owned security firm, veterans trained in non-lethal de-escalation and cyber surveillance. State-of-the-art cameras were installed, inside and out, with facial recognition software synced to Marcus's AI firm. Every angle was now accounted for. The entry would never again be caught unprotected. But defense wasn't enough. Marcus needed offense. That same week, he hosted a private town hall, inside the entry's main lounge. No DJs, no cocktails, just folding chairs, clipboards, and conviction. Invitations went out to civic leaders, community business owners, and entrepreneurs who had faced racial barriers in finance, zoning, and corporate licensing. Howard stood at the door as people arrived, nodding silently as each person passed. Inside, Marcus opened the evening with no theatrics, just truth. "We've all been denied, and then blamed for knocking." The room hummed with knowing silence. "I'm done waiting for policy change," Marcus said. "Let's create a code. Something public, something enforceable by presence and principle." Together, over 6 hours and shared stories, they drafted what would be called the Access Equity Pledge, a voluntary but binding commitment for businesses to follow specific anti-discrimination practices in hiring, service, investment, and space accessibility. The language was sharp, measurable, unapologetic. Within a week, over 150 small businesses signed it. Barbershops, bookstores, breweries, tech startups. Some even painted it on their windows. What began as one man's act of reclamation was now a movement. The entry wasn't just a building anymore. It was a blueprint. Meanwhile, Alicia was working her own campaign, one of documents, subpoenas, and relentless pressure. She had grown colder, more surgical. She no longer met Rose's legal team with negotiation. She hit them with discovery demands, ethics filings, and forensic audits. Her law office became a nerve center for truth. Past employees, managers, and contractors began to come forward. A former HR executive from one of Rose's Miami clubs confessed she'd been ordered to shred formal discrimination complaints before corporate reviews. A regional manager testified to quarterly meetings where phrases like "keep the clientele aspirational" were used in coded language to justify selective entry. A black mixologist from Chicago recounted being told she was too dark for bottle service sections. By the time federal investigators got involved, Rose's empire was already buckling. His PR team released a limp statement about regrettable incidents, but it was too late. The Department of Justice froze his assets under suspicion of coordinated civil rights violations. Marcus watched it unfold, with detached focus. He wasn't celebrating. He was building. One by one, 6 former Velvet locations accepted his acquisition terms. He didn't just rename them, he rewired them. Each was redesigned by local artists. Each was operated by a leadership team chosen for their vision, not just their resumes. One club had a rooftop poetry deck. Another had a mentorship lounge, where teens learned audio engineering on Saturdays. Every location had a mural wall dedicated to someone denied before they could ever dream. And they were full. Every night. Not because they sold status, but because they honored spirit. The financial freeze placed by the federal judge was lifted days after Rose's assets were frozen. Proof that it had all been a weaponized delay tactic. Marcus's accounts reopened with interest penalties reimbursed. The media couldn't ignore the narrative any longer. Articles ran with headlines like, "From Velvet Rope to Movement, How Marcus Ellington Flipped the Script." A viral TikTok showed footage of all 6 clubs at once, each alive with music, color, laughter, and captioned, "This is what access looks like." Then the voicemail came. Marcus played it twice just to be sure. "Hi, this is Cassandra from Netflix Originals. We'd like to discuss potential rights to your story, documentary, or scripted. Your call. We think the world's ready to see how legacy is reclaimed. Call us back." Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at Howard, seated across from him that evening. His father smiled, eyes softer than usual. "They want the story, huh? They want the fireworks," Marcus said. "Not the fire it took to get here." Howard sipped his tea, then said something that stuck. "You can give them the story, just don't let them edit out the scars." Just as Marcus opened his laptop to respond to the Netflix inquiry, an alert popped up. "Urgent. Invitation to speak at U.S. congressional hearing on racial equity in business licensing." Marcus read the header again, heart pounding. This wasn't just business anymore. It was policy, and he had the mic. The light in the congressional chamber glowed with the chill of ceremony. Polished wood, muted brass, and rows of suited figures, most of whom had never stood outside a club wondering if they looked right enough to be let in. But Marcus stood calmly at the center of it all, posture tall, voice measured, hands resting lightly on the folder that held both his written testimony and his lineage. The placard before him read, "Mr. Marcus Ellington, founder of the Entry Holdings and the Entry Foundation." Beside him, a monitor displayed looping footage from 6 cities, crowds outside renovated clubs, vibrant murals, community coding classes, and old women dancing where they were once told they didn't belong. Behind him, the Senate subcommittee title banner read, "Hearing on Racial Bias in Urban Zoning and Licensing Pathways to Equity." Howard Ellington sat in the gallery. For a man who had once been silenced in contracts and boardrooms, he now wore his name, like armor. His eyes didn't leave his son. Marcus began. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been told, you don't belong." He paused. Let the weight of the phrase breathe. "I was denied entry to a club I later bought. But that's not the story. That's just the trigger. The story is about how systems disguised as dress codes, zoning ordinances, loan denials, and whispered biases keep communities locked out of ownership. The real velvet rope isn't just in front of clubs. It's written into paperwork. The chamber was silent. He continued, recounting how the entry evolved into more than nightlife, how it became a sanctuary, a studio, a scholarship hub, how community centers began modeling their youth programs after his club's weekend workshops, how formerly incarcerated men now ran soundboards, directed community events, and trained the next wave of creative tech. "Equity is not about charity," he said. "It's about recognizing that legacy has no dress code. and neither should access. C-SPAN would replay the moment for weeks. The clip trended with the caption, "The door he built for all of us." A year had passed since that humid Atlanta night, where Marcus was pushed away in silence. Now his voice echoed across Congress, classrooms, and streaming queues. Netflix had greenlit the docuseries based on his story. The working title, Entry Denied. The trailer opened with real footage, grainy phone video of him being denied outside the original Velvet, then crossfading to the rebranded sign, The Entry, bathed in golden light. The final line of the teaser wasn't from an actor. It was Marcus's own voice, crisp, calm, and clear. "They denied me entry, so I built the door wider." By the time the series premiered, The Entry had expanded to 12 cities. Each location was unique. In New Orleans, it doubled as a hurricane shelter with backup generators. In Detroit, it offered auto tech apprenticeships during the daytime. In Oakland, it held spoken word therapy nights for survivors of racial trauma. Marcus hadn't just expanded his brand. He'd redefined what a venue could be. In Atlanta, the original Velvet building, now purchased entirely through the Entry Foundation, was no longer a club. It was renamed the Ellington Institute for Business Equity, a think tank and grant center, dedicated to funding Black and brown entrepreneurs denied by traditional banks. Every quarter, the institute awarded 10 startups with capital, mentorship, and media exposure. Former critics were now allies. Influencers who had once posted shady subtweets now attended panels he hosted. One even recorded a podcast episode titled, "I Got Marcus Ellington Wrong." And then the apology letter arrived. Nick, the bouncer who had first denied Marcus entry. The letter was handwritten, humble, no excuses, just reflection. "I saw the video. I saw what you built. I realize now I was the gatekeeper of a system I didn't even understand. I'm sorry for my part in it. I've enrolled in anti-bias training, and I'd like to attend one of your seminars." Marcus didn't post the letter, didn't parade it online. He simply replied with a reserved ticket and a quiet note, "Come learn, then go teach." Nick came, sat in the front row, took notes. Change was not performative anymore. It was actionable. Marcus's days were now filled with meetings, mentorship calls, architectural planning, and policy advocacy. Yet he carved out time always for what grounded him. He visited middle schools where students watched the Netflix series in class. He met with inmates in youth detention centers, sharing how he turned rejection into structure. He spoke at tech summits, breaking down how artificial intelligence had helped him uncover discrimination patterns no human eye could spot. He was more than a figurehead. He was a force, but even forces need quiet. One late night, after a panel on ethical urban development, Marcus returned to his Atlanta office alone. He flicked on the desk lamp, letting the soft glow stretch across photos on the wall. Images of each entry club, framed newspaper clippings, and 2 centerpieces, a portrait of his mother beside one of his father. On the desk was a handwritten note. He hadn't noticed it earlier. It was from Howard. "You finished what I started. Not with revenge, with vision. I'm proud of you. Love, Dad." Marcus sat down slowly, read the words twice, then folded the paper gently, placing it in the drawer beside his first ownership deed. He exhaled deeply. Not relief. Resolution. He stood up, turned off the lights, ready to leave for the night. Just then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. "International." He answered. A calm voice with a Japanese accent spoke on the other end. "Mr. Ellington, my name is Takahiro Watanabe. I oversee cultural ventures in Tokyo's Shibuya district. We followed your journey, and we believe it's time." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Time for what?" "To bring the entry to Japan. Not as a franchise, but as a philosophy. Will you come?" Marcus glanced once more at the mural by the entrance, painted in soft gold, with bold letters that read, "Entry isn't something you earn, it's something we honor." He smiled, not just because of the call, but because legacy, once denied, had become exportable. It had become fireproof. They told him he didn't belong, but he turned that rejection into a revolution. Because legacy isn't given, it's reclaimed. If you've ever been made to feel small for who you are, this story was for you. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.